So,
How's it going?
Colin, when I used to go to people's houses when I was younger, I'd always look for bookshelves because I'm a reader. And I'd look at their bookshelves, and to my great dismay, there weren't any. And slowly, people started getting bookshelves. And when they got them, there was the Book of Kirtan,
Yeah.
and then there was the Shakespeare collection,
Yeah.
and
Britannia Encyclopedia.
Exactly. There was nothing reflective of anybody who looked like me and my relatives.
Yeah.
And now that I'm starting to see you, and where on the bookshelf are you going to be?
You know, first of all, I want to thank both of you, Mita Hans, Harry Marn. This project, The Three Houses, began because of Michael. It began because I said to myself, I think I can do this. But then when I said that and Harry was aware of it, it was only when Mita walked into the museum and said, hey, I'm launching my father's book, and this is what I do. And I remember going to Harry, like, I think she's the one that can help me. And so I want to thank you personally, because this book is what it is today. I'd say not just because of me, but I think a huge part, like, you don't understand the fan at home you have in Cindy. Like, throughout this whole thing, it's always been Mita, 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 Mita. None of this would have happened without you. And then I would also say to Harry that he was my go-to beyond Cindy of every version that I wanted to update and review. Harry was the guy I could go to because I knew he was going to give me the real honest goods. And so now, after a journey of several years, a book has come out, and I think its place on a bookshelf hopefully is kind of not just in a particular category of, say, self-help. And it's not in the autobiographical, but it's not for children only, and it's not for adults only. I'm hoping it fits, like as if you could spread the pages and lay it flat. And so you could actually kind of pick it up whether you're from a young age, or if you're an older person, or if you're on a spiritual journey, or if you haven't started one yet. I'm hoping it captures everyone. And I don't want it to be just for our community. Like I've always said, and I may have said it to you, Mita, when we used to meet for these meetings, for me, I felt the market that I was aiming for were probably the female market, because I felt that they would embrace some of the stories more than others.
Well, when I had friends coming over, they'd always ask me for books about people like me. They're like, I want to know more about your culture. I want to know who you guys are. And I had nothing to give them, to reference them. So I want to thank you for providing that book that I can put on my shelf that so many people have wanted to read. This is really exciting.
And I'd say to Harry, because again, for those who don't know, historian, linguistic, Harry, is it because we as a community now are at that point where the arts flourish, they say, when other things have been taken care of? Like, do you think that I may have completed the book, Lily's done a book, Humble's done a book, others have done books? Do you think it's got something to do where the community may be at this present moment?
I think a lot of it has to do with the community being diasporic. And when you have a generation that's diasporic, they spend a lot of their time trying to figure out who they are and what they are. And because they've had to hold on stronger, because you carry some of the intergenerational trauma, some of the pressures, some of the stresses, some of the fun of the previous generation, but it's all foundational. So you're trying to make sense of that, but make sense of the world that you don't fully fit in. And this actually got me thinking about a question that I had for you, which is this book, it'll reach out to a lot of people. And what appealed to me about it initially was that it's Colin telling his story, right? Same theme.
Yeah.
It's somebody sharing what they've gone through. Because when somebody shares what they've gone through, you find yourself in that person through various phases. And I guess my question to you is, when you were writing it, which phase did you start at? So this is always going to be, for me, it's a 2-3 part question. which phase did you find yourself most in tune with at the end? And which one do you think, or have got feedback that people were most engaged with?
So let me start from the latter part of the question. Which area, or what is the feedback so far? It's only been just over a month. Not everybody's reading it within days. Some people are obviously taking weeks, and it'll take months. But the feedback that I'm getting is basically three things. It's an easy read, can't put it down, it's inspiring. And so for me, that last, it's inspiring, hopefully, is the crescendo of the sections and the way the chapters were formulated. Again, thank you to Mita. Because the earlier part tells the story, and the easiest part for me, Harry, was telling my earlier story. Because that film, that reel, as they say, has been spinning in my head for decades. You know, I've been playing it, I've been viewing it, I've been feeling it for many decades. But the one for me that I felt was the most challenging, but I hope I did a good job, was those final chapters of self-help, the ones about we're all energy beings, you know, the three houses. Because those were an accumulation of my inner journey, my reading, and my reading of the world. And so for me, these were look, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I'm in my 50s now. And so for me, the only negative I have about all of this is, man, it came in my 50s. If I could have launched this in my 40s, because people say you become wiser with age. And so some may say, well, hey, it's to be expected. He's in his 50s. He should have gathered all of this knowledge. But what I hoped people are finding throughout that, and what they deem to be inspirational, is the fact that I sound like you. I've had the experiences that may be very similar with many people. Yet he's talking about things, deep things, internal communication things, which we may not all be having. And I'm hoping if they relate to me in the earlier parts, they therefore connect with me in the more critical and important parts.
One of the things that you talked about was the skinheads in the 80s and all of that going on with racial politics. And when I translate that to the younger generation, our kids, they look at me and say, well, we're going through that now.
Wow.
Have you looked at Trump America? Have you looked at what's going on with, today in Peterborough with Jagmeet Singh being attacked by a group of freedom fighters, whatever the hell they are. They were awful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I looked at that and I thought, how have we grown? How have we changed? So your story, although it was set, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is still very much current.
And that's, and it's, to me, let's talk about these freedom movement folks. The ones that were causing ruckus on the bridge in Windsor, the ones that were causing issues in Ottawa, and the ones that were now like that. If I've watched that clip over and over again, maybe 5 times, and there's that lady screaming at Jagmeet, and I'm wondering what has gone wrong in our lives, in society, for us to be that angry at somebody else, like to have that much anger. And to me, and I think one of the things I tried to say, and the reason Michael always said, look, you don't walk around with a chip on your shoulder. You have every right to do so, but you don't, and that is why you need to write a book. So now I'm saying, maybe we need to change education at schools, at colleges, and academically, where we're teaching people the inner journey. Because I have every right to be as angry, maybe even angrier than that lady in Peterborough. Mm-hmm. But I've never done that screaming. Like I share that story of that one particular guy who bullied me, and when I got my vengeance and my retaliation, it was the dance of like Shiva. I had tears going down my cheeks. I still live it whenever I think about it, because here was the guy that tormented me, And I tried to share with somebody I'm like, look, this is what I went through. I was at a Victorian style high school, which meant you have a very long corridor and classrooms coming off every 20 feet. And then after every class, you were expected to go into that corridor, and you were there with second year, third year, and fourth year students. So that's 13, 14, 15 kind of year olds in the same corridor. And we know the physical size difference and the growth spurts that happen. So imagine me, remember my brother's already, he's gone to the annex side, so he's gone to the larger one, so he's no longer there to support me. So I'm now the only guy with the turban. Imagine after every class, I had to come out after every 40 minutes and expect somebody was going to try and attack me and knock my turban off. Every day of my high school life for at least the first year of high school, maybe the second. Yet, Harry's known me forever, you've known me forever. I don't carry that. I'm not a victim to that. And so why are we having people screaming at a politician and then certain racial slurs being made? Yeah, why is it happening in 2022? And we thought it was over in 1982.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Speaking of skinheads, I'll share a personal story. So I have actually been dealing with a psychotherapist for the last year and a bit, and I've gone through some of the trauma. One of my first traumas was watching my dad get punched by skinheads and one long-haired guy. And I remember the person spitting on my mom. I was 3, happened in downtown Coventry. And I remember 2 very tall Jamaican guys coming in. I remember one had dreads, and then they came and they punched the guys twice. And I remember my dad trying to break it up at that point, but I just remember being scared and somebody shouting at my face. That was the age of 3. And I'm like, that was my first memory. I shared that with somebody in 2016. I'm going to tie it into your point. He was from England, and when I said skinheads and I brought it up, it's almost like a whole generation was unaware that this type of racial violence occurred. And it's scary that Trump America, or this Trumpism's out, but all it is those quiet voices getting louder and louder.
Yeah.
Now, why do they feel disenfranchised? I'm going to give you my honest opinion. When you're predicating everything on something that's not even scientifically sound, such as racism. If you're to sit there and say, okay, tribes, I understand. But when your racism includes a name that could possibly be Sicilian, but because you're 6'3" and slightly darker than the rest of them, you're accepted because you're not the next shade darker. It tells me that it has nothing to do with the race. Even the thoughts behind it are stemming from some sort of insecurity. And what's this insecurity in society? And why is it okay in any philosophical mode? Because I've noticed when you look at any group which has a human tradition, not a religious one, I'm going to say human tradition, which has evolved over time, there's certain things that you don't need to be taught because you're cultivating that on the inside and you're connecting with it. And I find that the societies that we're living in right now are so materialistic, so ego-based, so much so that it's like your social credit determines who you are and what you are, and you need to otherize somebody. I think that's the problem. So when I see people being racist and it's like ignorance, but at a psychological level. Like half the people there probably don't like Jagmeet because they hate Trudeau, and all of a sudden, because Jagmeet is seen as being loyal or aligned with Trudeau, he's aligned with the devil. Because sometimes it's harder to hate people that you don't even know. But when you get a chance to know somebody even a little bit, there's a familiarity.
I think you mentioned success, so let's talk about success. Because I think there are so many wrongs in society that we all need to rewrite. Education needs to be reconfigured, where the talk of spirituality and inner journey wellness, I think, has to be key. Success for a lot of people today is a Range Rover, a big house, and multiple vacations. When really, for me, success should be, are you waking up happy every day? Are you able to go to bed happy every day? to me, that is so much more valuable than, yeah, you're sitting in a new car. Yeah, how long do you feel good about that car? Yeah, you've got a huge house. How long do you feel good about that? Because what I describe in the book is that there is a void I think we all have. And we think that materialism is going to replenish and fill that void. But it can't. I think the only thing that fills it, and I'd love to turn to Mita for this, is giving. And look at what you've been doing. Like, let's go 2 years, 3 years before COVID, and let's talk about some of the work you've been doing in COVID. Because, you know, there are soup kitchens, but then there is organizing to feed those that are most in need in parks in Toronto. But again, let's talk about that void, but then tell us about some of the work you've been doing over the past few years.
It was actually specifically to fill the void that I started doing this, that I was lacking connection. I was lacking connection to community, and that we become so isolated. And I live downtown, and where I live, I'm very much, nobody wants to come visit because you can't find parking. You know, and so if I want to see anybody, I have to drive out here to see my family who live out in the suburbs. So that feeling of isolation from community, you have to create your own community. And when you're creating a community, look at the common values. What are the things that unite us instead of the things that divide us? And we all want to do good. We all want to help. We all want to, but we don't necessarily know where to start. And my super talent is bringing together people from disparate communities that wouldn't normally meet anywhere else. So I'm very heavily involved with my partners Indigenous, with the Indigenous community downtown. And there was a need. There's a need there, and they said that the need is we don't have the support structures in place for the people who are houseless, who need access to food. There's a great deal of food insecurity with the rent prices going sky high, that we stop and think about the consumerism of what we buy. We also have to look at the other side of that, of what money can't buy. It can't buy security anymore. It can't buy food for your family anymore. So when that's missing, and the government is not stepping up to provide the systemic racism, the systemic anti-ableism, the anti-poverty in the system that's built in, it says middle class gets perks. And everybody, when they want voters, they appeal to the middle class. They're not worried about the lower stratus that isn't voting for them in large blocks necessarily. So I thought, here we have in Mississauga, in the suburbs where my community lives, we have a great deal of resources.
We do.
And nobody knows what to do with them. They end up giving them to each other because what do we do with that? We take it to the temple, we drop it off, and then they end up with a warehouse full, and they give it back out and say, please take some home.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do with that. So what if we combine these two groups so that that group is filling the need that this one has? And that's how the Langar Seva started, because that's a part of my culture. That's how I grew up. You feed people.
Yeah.
And you feed those in need. And you take it to where they are.
Yeah.
So I started that at Allen Gardens,
Yeah.
and that was 6-7 years ago. Huge success. And then from that, it's grown, and there's different groups now doing the same. And it's not a charity model. It's not us giving to them. I followed the basic principles of Sikhi, which is us, community, eating together.
Wow.
So nobody was refused. Nobody was belittled.
Yeah.
You want to take seconds. You want to take some home. You
Yeah.
go right ahead.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't their typical religious model. And that human component is very different from the religious model.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, we could sit here and do a whole podcast on the Sikh philosophy and the Sikh religion and really tear that apart. But I don't think we have enough bandwidth to respond to all those people that would be replying to us and saying, "How dare you?"
Yeah.
But again, I think from this elements of giving, you know, that I think is essential for this journey. So at what point, let's talk about education. So I was told by a wise person here in Canada that the education system in the West, so we can go Europe, UK, all the way over to North America and other parts of the world now, that the way they've assimilated, set this system up, it's less than 5% will never ever succeed in order to care for themselves, to feed themselves. And they will always have to rely on the government. They want that segment, always. Government benefits from it. The vast majority, over 80%, I've been told, is the workforce. Supervisors, laborers, maybe lower management. And then you have this 10% they always wanted to go for further education, and they're the ones that are going to decide the new policies and regulations and control. And that is the model, because that is the model that provided support for the Industrial Revolution 1.0 back in the 1700s, 1800s. And they've continued that. Now, countries like India and other nations are embracing that same model. But I'm saying it's broken. I'm saying it's probably been broken for maybe a century or two. Because what we're producing is a workforce, but we're not producing wholesome people. You aren't a student, yes, you go to school and college and university and your mind is opened, your eyes are opened, your learning is increased. But I keep coming back to the inner journey. Does it allow or put you on track to go on the inner journey? It doesn't. Nobody wants to talk about it. I read Will Smith's biography about 2 months before he decided to slap Chris, and he's fortunate that Chris didn't knock him out. But when I read Will Smith's biography, if you get to chapter 18 to 21, he's literally promoting my book, The Three Houses, because here is this guy who's become the biggest box office hit ever. A legendary rap artist, all-round good guy, like all-round good guy. He hasn't put a foot wrong in most places. And he's like, I have nothing. I feel empty. I feel like I have got nothing inside. I thought success and money was going to fill that void, and it didn't. And then he starts his spiritual journey. He goes to South America. What's the ayahuasca? Ayahuasca. He goes on, uses ayahuasca, goes on 12 trips, blows his mind, opens his mind up, goes to India. He's in India. He was in India last week. Like, he's really beginning to search, but he's in his late 50s. My point is, why not at 15? Or why not at 12 or 10? Why are we not educating the youth to start thinking about the value of the inner journey?
I think part of that is not seeing role models. That when we are exposed as young people to celebrity culture, to people who are like us, it's more the Kardashians, that you should be like this. Yeah. You should be like this. And what has sadly been missing is the familiar, and saying, I could be like this. What a wonderful journey this person has been on. We don't have those comparable role models that are relatable and that are like us, that have had similar journeys and similar backgrounds, that give us the potential of what we could be. We're never going to be a Kardashian, no, but we could be a Colin.
Yeah.
If those role models are presented in that way as attainable and real, I think that you could get there.
Why, Harry? Why isn't a person who's more spiritual the role model, as opposed to the person who's probably empty internally but looks great on camera?
It's all about the sizzle, nothing about the steak. And I think that sums it up.
Yeah.
Because you don't value what is good unless it's gonna get you praise. And the fact that you're looking at good and bad, I think in itself is the wrong dichotomy, because there's a leitmotif or a set of principles which determine what's good and what's bad, and that's largely determined by the society around you. But the thing is, youth don't feel engaged with larger society, period. That's why you have these countercultures and youth culture, etc., etc. But everything that's espoused as being good only happens through really organized messages which are sent out through churches and religious institutions, which are in line with who's going to be dominated now in this world, so that the elites, the 10% you're talking about, and the main reason why the system is the way it is because it's not meant to serve the masses. It's meant to serve the elite. No matter how you look at it, everybody's looking to be part of the elite, but it's elusive, and it always will be.
We're in a period here in Canada where immigration numbers are going to be the highest they've ever been on record. Over 400,000 immigrants are going to be allowed into Canada this year. Next year is going to be even greater, I think 430,000. And there is a large movement of international students coming to Canada.
Right.
And I was chatting to somebody at one of the major colleges here in the GTA, and I believe they said 60% of them are from one particular province, and then 85% are from a particular region of that province or state in India. Now, that state, our ancestral home, let's just say Punjab,
Sure.
Where the Sikh kingdom, portion of the Sikh kingdom was. The Punjab is, the northwest kind of, frontier landmass. Famous because that's where Ram apparently played. That's where Krishna played. That's where the 10 gurus played. That's where, close enough to, I would say, to Buddha's kind of, digs as well. It's a special land. Like if we talk about energy, that there may be something about it. Yet I'm hearing the stories today of the materialism. I'm hearing stories today of the lack of substance of individuals from that land. And it's like, what went wrong? Because I'd like to be clear. I'm not just saying the West doesn't understand the inner journey. Here is the land that gave you all of those great philosophers and gurus and prophets. What's gone wrong?
I'd like to say that it may have started with the destruction of books. That in Punjab at the time the British arrived, literacy was the highest in the world. And it no longer is. And it goes back to, now I don't see a bookshelf in a Sikh household. How did we get from that to here?
Wow.
And the mindset follows.
Yeah.
That when we don't have access to the books, the knowledge, the curiosity, the interest in how our neighbors live, where are we learning from?
Yeah. Dr. Littner, The Indigenous Education of the People of Punjab, 1882. It's a book that we've all looked at here at the museum. That it's where he stated the highest literacy rates. He said, we think we're the advanced people of the world in Europe. No, these guys are way ahead. Women and girls are being educated. Yet the story goes that after the uprising of 1857, the East India Company, or then maybe the British government, did a book burning. They burnt books and books and books and ended this literacy, where I think some of our kind of great-grandparents were illiterate. Yet our guru, the 11th guru, is a scripture that's in the written form.
I was reading a quote today that said, people who are threatened by books to the point of wanting to destroy them, it's not the books that they're afraid of, it's the thinking.
100%. It's Nazi Germany 1933 or 34 when they decided to do book burnings throughout Germany.
And the pieces of knowledge that have been destroyed by destroying those books, I don't know if you're following the unearthing of Harappa, the excavations that are going on there, and they're finding that civilization that's in our backyard literally is older than any other that they have previously found. And we had that knowledge for, sewer systems, flush toilets, and all of that 8,000 years before they thought we did.
Wow.
And very little has changed in that time, up to the previous century. And then in the last century, we have veered very, very far from it. How did we go so wrong?
There is definitely a there's talk about the Great Reset. I don't know if it's a book or don't know if it's a compilation of papers that were pulled together in the 1800s. They say Roosevelt read it. They say Churchill read it. They say some of these leaders of the West were basically told that, look, we have to do, this is all about the white Anglo-Saxon, and it's about us resetting things. And so I think we could go down that road and we could find certain questions and answers to things. But a question that I have with regards to the book. So both of you have obviously read it. Somebody here helped to pull it all together. Now let me ask both of you, what parts of the book or what chapter or what segment was the one that kind of like for you was like, oh wow, yeah, this is going to make a difference?
I'll start on this one. It actually started with childhood, because we got to see Colin as a child, and the way you described everything and then your artwork, it was amazing how the way you wrote it painted a picture in my head. Even now, it almost feels like I could go to that part of where you lived and be able to point out where it happened, which I thought was really interesting. And I think that childlike aspect of everybody, where they're in wonder of the world, but also vulnerable and scared of it, based on what happens, which is outside your control, I think that's going to touch so many people in so many different ways. So that's the human part that I think came through for me.
For me, it was your music years. I grew up with punk rock, The Wild Child.
Yeah, no way.
And
I wouldn't know that by looking at you.
and it thrilled me
Yeah.
to see that commonality over continents, over time, a little bit older than you are, and how excited you got about music. And I
think we all did, though, right? Wasn't music so important for us in the diaspora, and wasn't it like an escapism, if I could describe it that way?
And a way of relating, because music and sports were two things you could buy into, that you felt you could get a little bit closer. And and I know that because as soon as Bhangra or Punjabi music became big, I had the same feeling. I want to push people away, just because it happened to me. So, but it didn't happen as much in other areas.
I remember I think I was in my late teens, early 20s when Freddie Mercury passed away. And it's only after he passed away that there was a documentary made of his life, and I suddenly realized that he was of Indian heritage, Farouk. And I was like, oh, if only I had that at school. Like, that would have meant so much to me, that here's one of the greatest vocalists Britain has ever put on a stage, and he's got Indian descent. It's like, oh my, that would have been like a solid connection. Like, I love the Beatles because for me it was, you brought our music and you brought our instruments and you shared them with the world. Thank you very much. I love them for that. You know, forget how stupid sometimes John was, or how, you know, materialistic Paul is. It was the fact that they did that favor for us. Ever grateful.
We had the Poppy family in Canada, Terry and Susan Jacks.
Yeah, and the young Sardar in there.
And the Sardar in there. It was like, wait, what? What? We can do this?
We've got an album. We've got the album on the table over there. I was like, what? And it's so music connects us. And they say that the first guru, Guru Nanak, and his partner, his friend, Mardana, played the rabab, which was a 6-stringed instrument, right? 6 strings. And they say that the rags in which the poetic verses are written, when played with that instrument, just take you to other realms. You know, so I think music is transformative, right?
Yeah, and to speak to that, you can just actually look at Indian music, the way the Persian influences came in, how it took court music, but then also made that their form of spiritual music. And that spirituality transcends people of all religions, people who are really firm in their religion, which is anti-music, they find ways of having that music be expressive. Like there's one you're talking about, the rag, which was the tune or melody in which it was done, the feeling, that's what rag means. They talk about how candles would be lit when Deep Gid be played. Rag Deep Gid be played, or Deepak they'd call it, but we say Rag Gauri Deep Gid because that's part of what's one of the rags we're supposed to read almost daily. And it wasn't hard for me to believe because you grew up with the idea that opera singers can break glass when they hit high pitches.
Yeah.
So it's not as if frequency was too far out or dogs can actually hear past what humans can hear,
Yeah.
We have to admit that we may not be the best creatures on this earth, but you know what I mean, like God forbid, but it's interesting how certain truths are a bit higher than that. Oh, and speaking to the India thing, the Vedas were also written in the Punjab area, 3 of the 4. And
Wow.
those go back centuries.
Yeah.
Sorry.
For me, identifying, look, to be involved in the founding years of Brit Bhangra by accident, and by the way, my parents never knew. Like, how crazy is that?
Did they read about it in the book?
My dad's now reading my book, and he'll probably come across and go, well, I always knew, but they never knew, because we would have gotten into so much shit for actually doing this, because it would have been, you're promoting that style of life which we don't agree with. Girls and boys and drink and partying, like absolute no. For me, like today, I actually was on a Zoom call with my university best friends, and there were 5, 6 of us, and we were always tight for 3 years, and most of us haven't seen each other for 32 years. And so we all got on, and it was amazing to just catch up. And it was great to see everyone still look like what we'd left them looking like. But those were very delicate years where you grow as a person, and I kind of talk about it in my book. But I now look back at that period and say, really what that organizing and running the events has given me is what I do today. I'm a organizer, and I pull projects and programs together. Like, I've literally, give me a problem and I'll solve it. Like, do you get what I mean? It's funny how its roots are in music. Its roots are in entertainment. But for me, that's who I've become today. Like, yeah, if there's a problem, I'll solve it. Problem is, kids want to listen to a live band. You've got to find a location to have the performance, and you've got to bring the bands in. Okay, great. This is how we're going to do it. And so it's funny how things have kind of materialized into something else in later years.
You touched on, the parts that you don't tell your parents, and your story about your neighbors and shagging. I loved that part of the book. I absolutely loved it because it provides a touchstone to start those dialogues with our kids, and for them to start them with us, that these are the parts that we don't normally talk about. And for our mental health, we have to. Yeah. We have to see that it's difficult moving to a new culture and having one that's so different from our own, where we don't talk about these things with our elders ever.
Never.
We don't discuss sexuality. We don't discuss certain things. No. And by keeping all of this in, it creates chaos within. It creates the sense of duality, that you're living 2 separate lives.
100%.
And to see that, it makes it relatable, and it opens a passage of, well, maybe I can't tell my parents what's going on, and maybe I can't tell them the type of bullying I'm facing with this age of, video stuff, send me a selfie, and being held hostage over a selfie that was never meant for that person. And all kinds of that in our community.
Absolutely.
And in every community. And then you can't talk about it with your parents. And if you hand them a book and say, well, it takes it away one step and says, I may not be comfortable telling you what happened to me, but if you read this and we can start talking about it, it gives me an avenue to talk about the difficult things.
It's interesting you say that, and you talked about the duality, and Harry and I talk about that all the time. But I then go later on in the book, and I reference Eleanor Rigby from the Beatles and Paul McCartney, because one of the things I personally had to do, look, this is a story and a book about a real person that goes to No Frills to try and buy butter when it's on sale, because that's what all Indians do, isn't it? I am your next door neighbor and all that. I wanted it to always feel granular and raw. But one of the things I've learned, and I've learned it from my life partner and my best friend, Cindy, is my wife, and you both know her well, there is only one mask. There are not multiple masks on this individual. Like, how blessed can you be to not have yet me? And I think a lot of us in the UK, like, I had my school mask for being cool with my mates. I had my getting the high grades mask, being good in front of the teachers. I had it's my parents, I better put that face on. I'm the good little Indian Sikh boy. I'm at the Gurdwara, and I'm going to be like, I had so many masks, and I literally did. I would go from one mask to the other mask and then interchange. And it wasn't until many years later I started to, and it was, I listened to Eleanor Rigby, and I used to think that she keeps that jar by the door, which if you read Paul's like, well, no, it's cold cream. Because in England, it's, it's so cold and dry, and you have to put some cold cream on. For me, I'd always visualized like, oh, she's wearing, because that song is possibly one of the first songs about mental health. And it's like she's wearing all these masks, so she's like me, because I had to peel. The number of girls in my generation that used to come to school dressed like X and then would go to the washroom and then dress like Y. From makeup to skirts. Like, it wasn't, you couldn't have the conversation at home. Our parents weren't ever going to understand, right? And today now, like, hey, parents, we're all responsible for little ones. And the one thing I tell my two is, be honest with us and be transparent. And we've got your back. Whether that's on sexuality, whether that's on choice of this, whether it's on these other choices, to disown or to, you have brought down the name of our descendants. Nonsense. No way. We're on this, as my boss and my good friend and my brother Flavio Volpe says all the time, we're on a spinning rock being circled by a ball of flame. It's a miracle we're here anyway. Let's just make sure it's a good ride.
Speaking of the good ride, I found it very interesting and quite inspiring that the proceeds went to two charities, and you brought the whole aspect of giving up, and you're talking about mental health. It's been one of the things that's been discussed. So I guess my question is, can you give us a little bit of the insight, what made you want to go down that path, and why those two specific charities?
Harry, look, the book's been written to help people. I've opened up a little bit of myself, and I was really concerned about that. And I think Meeta's kind of like, guidance to make sure we choose the right stories and our other stories, because there were 2 or 3 other chapters that never made it. And I think I exposed enough of myself, but still feel safe and secure, where I don't think you know me or everybody knows me and they all have a piece of me. And so here is a book that's been written to help people. And therefore, I'd said earlier on that the funds and the profits had to go towards charity. And so, I began to look at charities. I had a friend and his wife who work, in philanthropy. And so we had a few video calls, and we said, look, this is the context of the book. Sent him a PDF version. Please read it. And I want to find those charities that, first of all, education's huge for me. So youth and making a difference at a young age for me was critical. And then really the one organization that just kept coming to the top, to the top, to the top was Soch Mental Health. And it didn't matter if I was talking to this friend or that advisor or this person. Everybody that I spoke to just had good things to say about the work and Jasmeet and Manita doing. And so I read up on their website. I then set up a video call, and we just connected. And I love what they're doing. They're shining a light onto mental health in our community. And I'd love for us to discuss some of the work that they're doing and some of the issues and challenges we're facing. So Harry, to finally kind of pull the whole question together, Michael Pinball Clements Foundation works with youth. And typically youth that need support. And I think that's key, because I think we both want to further the conversation of education and the right type of education. And then here is Soch Mental Health looking at youth and seniors. They're looking at substance abuse. They're looking at other mental health and health issues and conditions. And so it's a bit of a, I won't say, I don't think it's been ignored in our community. We just somehow, it's flippant. It's a bit of a, oh, he's not well, because we all have members of our family and friends, generations gone, that haven't been well, and we still function as a family unit. And it's when someone's asked, oh, he's not well, or she's not well. That's it. That's the word that's always been described. But are they getting support? Are we trying to provide them support, or are we just letting them just be? And so I really like what these two are doing with Soch Mental Health.
I think that's a very salient point. What my research has shown me is that there were epistemes and knowledges that were indigenous to how things were done in Punjab. And it didn't, certain classes of society did certain things and other people did other things. Some of it was based on what they could afford diet-wise, what they had to make do with, many reasons, which then became social constructs at some point. But the point is that as the book burning happened, and as the old knowledge and the practitioners of that old knowledge started dying off, or they got killed off, whatever the case might have been, the new knowledge came with a new system, and that new system left the people who were used to having old ways of doing things feeling inferior because it wasn't what the new system was. And I think this is something that's really good, because your book speaks to a lot of stuff you've held and that you've understood, or that you've almost kind of known, but you connect with others on. And it'd be cool to hear a little bit more about that, because you talk about it in terms of electromagnetic, etc., but there's this larger oneness that you always push as well.
For me, that line at the end of, Ardas, that prayer we can say several times a day, Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Pane Sarbat Da Pala. Oh Nanak, bless the whole of humanity. Not the Sikhs, not just the Hindus, not just the Muslims, the Christians, the whole of humanity. For me, that's always been an integral part of me and my learning through my parents. We had copies of the Quran, we had copies of the Bible, we had copies of Gita in the same Babaji's room as we had, portions of the Guru Granth Sahib. And my parents never were like, well, no, these are crap, and this is the good stuff. And they were all, look, these are all words of the same dudes, just others are saying it in different ways. And so for me, there's always been this oneness. For me, giving, which is really the third house, and we'll go into that into a bit more detail. But for me, giving has always been probably the most valuable substance of character of an individual. And again, Meetha's describing, your blessed opportunities, because it's a blessing to be able to give. People, well, hold on, I've got to write a check for a charity. No, that's not just the only form of giving. Taking time out of your weekend to feed people or to support people, that's giving. Smiling as somebody's walking down the road on a cold January morning and saying morning, and suddenly you don't know how that's going to change that person's. And so the smiling, the feeding, the assistance it's universal. It shouldn't be, oh, we're all from the Sikh faith, so we're only going to support our own. The hashtag, Harry, you're a co-founder of the Sikh Heritage Museum. Our hashtag has always been, this is a Canadian thing, not a Sikh thing. It's always been about the oneness. Well, you know, that's just been part of me. But then when I went on my religious path, and then after my religious path, you know, when I call that chapter the fake fakir, thank you. Because, you know, I had a gentleman called Peter Watkins, who we did a podcast with, say, you know what, that period after your fake fakir kind of did what he did, he goes, most of us would have been just shredded and left in pieces and blamed everything and everybody for why it's just bad. The world is bad, religion is bad, people are. And he goes, but the fact that you seem to have come into your like self-improvement years after that is what's really key. And I said, I'm so glad you've recognized it, because for me, that is where I took responsibility, as opposed to, oh no, I'm with this organization, so it's a shared responsibility and I will be taken care of. No, I am responsible for my actions. I'm responsible for my words. I'm responsible for my happiness. Nobody else is. Not my wife, not my parents, not my friends, not my family. I am responsible to go to bed happy and to wake up happy. And so maybe over a decade ago, both Cindy and I had said, go to bed happy, go to wake up happy. That is, if we get that down 360 days a week, boom, like we're living the dream. And so we've been working this, and I tell you, oneness plays a key role in this, because I don't wear those tinted glasses and see people for the tonal value of their skin or the faith that they belong to. If you're a good person, you're a good person. And if you're not, you're not. But let's try and figure out how we can make you better.
I love you.
Likewise, Mita. We the three of us here are kind of like, we're the three musketeers or the three stooges, however you want to put it, because Harry and you are connected and me and you became connected, and we've stayed kind of connected. And then 4 or 5 years went by, and then Mita was doing her thing, Colin was doing his thing. But again, we're back because we needed to be back. You know, my book, so many people read it earlier on. They were like, oh, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? When's it coming out? And I had taken on a new job and a new position. I put it on the back burner. And you know what? I was okay with it. I wasn't like, oh my God, because I like to get projects done. Harry knows. Don't like things left open, close it. But it just didn't feel right yet. And then suddenly COVID hits, and those that had read these kind of like manuscripts were like, you need to get that out. People need to be reading this now. We need that help now. And that became the push. And then suddenly now we're back together. Like,
COVID changed a lot of people. When I started the caremongering during COVID, I've heard from countless people on all of the continents of how that movement changed them, because it taught them a different way of thinking.
Can you
They're
tell us?
shifting their, and it's what you were talking about, that your happiness depends on you. What are you going to do to help others? What are you going to do to help those in your immediate environment? That you don't have to sit helpless. You don't have to wait for anything. And then initially there was a lot of skepticism, going, what are you getting out of this? Like, nothing. That's just it. We started with zero. Not 1 cent of money was spent, and we got offered a ton of it, and we said no to all of it. And we said, no, we don't want to muddy the waters there. Let's do this for the right reasons, just because we're all struggling. We're all having a really difficult time, and the only thing we can do is help each other. We're all in this together. And how do we help each other? And by finding the commonalities and saying, well, I've got a little extra of this and you look like you need some, rebuilding communities, because what you were saying about that loss of community and being shifted onto something that doesn't quite fit, we lost our place as human beings, not just in Punjab, but around the world. With industrialization, we lost that sense of having time to be with each other, to engage. And I think the pandemic really put a stop, a blanket over all of us, and made us rethink what's important. What if everything were to come to a standstill? What's important?
Yeah.
And it's our connection on a human level with each other and with ourselves that matters. It's the only thing that does.
I know, and I'm sure both of you have made those choices. Getting those invites to go to the Gurdwara for Akhand Paths from folks you don't really know and you don't really care for, we both said, no, we're done with that. Our time is precious. Our time together is precious. How can we make a difference? You know, Harry and I and Pradeep and Gurmeet from the museum, you know, we coined something called the Centre of Learning. And so we think there is the next step in this whole movement, which will obviously include you and everybody else here, to say, how can we take this idea into something that really supports the community? Education, multiple bookshelves, multiple computers, but seniors, children, students, everybody together, you know, because it's about giving back. And I think we also should be proud, and a few people have said that to me, don't be shy of promoting the Sikh community, because nobody else is going to promote your community. You have to promote your own community. And so that's one thing that I've been trying to fight with as well. I don't want it to be like me banging the drum of the Sikh community, but I think we also need to, because there are some, you know, we do have some members of parliament and we have others that are representing the community, but we're more than just politics, right? We're more than just entertainment. I think we've been given 1,430 pages of poetic love stories and journeys of the inner kind. I think we need to share that story and those things with others.
And I think just being is sharing that when you are who you are, it's a given that you're a representative of your community, no matter where you go, whether you like it or not. You're a representative of that community.
And I think we've got that ass backwards. I think we've got it wrong. I think maybe some of the people that we think are represented the community because of their positions in society, I think it's wrong. It's like going back to the Kardashians. They are what's going to define the 2020s. Like, that family is what we're looking to be like. We need to be like them. We want to be like that. No. You know, the first thing I'd say is money doesn't equal happiness. Couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, you need enough to be content. You need enough to survive well. And then you have the wants and desires. We all listen. I'm not going to be, hypocritical. I love electric vehicles. My project at the moment is developing Canada's first electric vehicle concept, and so I love driving electric vehicles, and they are a few pennies. But that doesn't mean it's the be all and end all of Colin. That's just because Colin's a tech design kind of guy and he likes that kind of stuff. But the question is, what is Colin doing to make a difference? And so for me, look, I'm in that final 20-year period of I'm in my 50s. Hopefully I make it to my mid-70s. And I want this period to be the part where, hey, I had a really good innings, cricket terminology, but now I want to start just giving back. If I can spend the next 15 to 20 years making a difference globally, that's what I want to do. For me, that would be like, hey, it worked. I did it. I did something worthy. I made a bit of a difference. Little old me moved the dial a little bit. That is my hope.
These are called the legacy years.
Yeah.
You want to leave something behind.
And not just for my kids. Listen, academically, pushing them through education, so you'll be able to sustain yourselves in typical professions. But it's the depth. Like my kids and we talk about faith and religion, and it's horrifying for some people to hear what my kids have to say about religion. And a lot of that is I'm to blame.
So I have a question for you. When you see your book on a bookshelf in 20 years and your kids are looking at it, what do you want them to look at and say, my dad did that?
I think it's definitely the last 4 or 5 chapters. If for me, maybe I could write another book just on contentment, commitment, and contribution, and just take that. I've got ideas running around my head. Cindy would kill me if I shared them, about traveling the world and speaking to people about contentment, commitment, contribution, collecting that data, and then creating a book to say, here, look, this is what the world thinks about contentment, commitment, contribution. For me and Cindy have always said, when my son was born, that our responsibility is, one, to create two good citizens of the world. That is it. Not two good Sikhs, not two good Punjabis, not two good Canadians. Citizens of the world. If my children are in a space and people go, man, that's a good person, we did our job. And hopefully part of that comes from that chapter, The Three Houses.
Are you looking at that for your little kids too? You've got little ones now, and what are you leaving for them?
I think I'll be keeping them mentally astute and constantly challenging them. So challenge just becomes normal. And this growth mindset, this approach is what's going to be really, really interesting. I'd love to see more of it manifest. I know things happen cyclically in this world. That time had occurred earlier as well. But these conversations will, and the technology we have, if used correctly, will help get us to that type of point. But those will be the 3 chapters that I'll get them to read.